Hi, everyone. I have so much music loaded now for this broadcast. Yesterday, as many of you know, on I don't even have my light on behind me. Shoot. As many of you know from yesterday's Progressive Coffee Hour, our Patreon subscribers love the fact that the music changes up here every day. So I'm doing my best to kind of keep that going. But I have so much music loaded now that I have to scroll all the way to the bottom of the list to get us to kind of like fade out. So my apologies for the delay on that. Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening if you happen to be in Sweden. Hello to our international friends who are here. I am Elizabeth Cronise McLaughlin, and this is Resistance Live for the 4th of December, 2023. As always, I'm coming to you from occupied Tongva territory today. I am wearing a gray V-neck sweater today with my thick hoops for our visually challenged viewers. My skin is light pink. I have green eyes and dirty blonde hair, and I'm sitting in my office with a lamp that is off today, unlike normally, and a plant behind me and a big cushy chair on my bookshelf. It's nice to see you all. And I'm glad you're all here. Please don't forget to hit like on this broadcast if it is meaningful to you. All right, we have a ton to talk about today, but I just want to start with what happened on Friday in Fulton County, because the breaking news about this is so stunningly beyond the pale that I'm still kind of feeling it on Monday morning. Many of you know that all the hearings in front of Judge McAfee on Friday were live streamed, of course, as always, on the court's YouTube channel. And after our broadcast on Friday, I went and looked at those. Sorry, I'm getting rid of the banner. Thank you. I went and looked at the hearing as it was going on, and I had it playing for like the remainder of the day, basically, because the hearing went on for hours and hours. And one of the most shocking things came kind of midway through when the judge was trying to get rid of all the motions that potentially implicated some of the more senior folks who were in the room: Trump, Giuliani, Meadows, and the like. And basically it went down like this. As you may recall, John Eastman has asked for a division of trial dates for like 7 or 8 defendants tried in one batch and another 7 or 8 defendants tried in another, and Trump tried separately, because they basically do not want to have all the evidence that's going to be admitted against Trump admitted in the same courtroom in front of the same jury where they're being tried as well. And there was a big debate about trial dates and breakup and all that sort of stuff at a certain moment in the hearing. And oh my goodness. So one of the things that came up in the hearing itself was that Fani Willis had indicated that the trial would probably run for about 5 months, and she had initially asked for a trial date in August. It's very unclear whether or not that's actually going to fly at this point, because the judge was sort of hearing all angles on this on Friday afternoon. However, one of the things that Trump's lawyers did was they said that in the event that he was going to be tried starting in August, that would directly interfere with his ability to campaign, which, you know, in my book is too bad, so sad, see ya. But nonetheless, the claim was this will be election interference if he has to be on trial during the window of the run up to November. And given that he can't be tried then without it being a violation of his First Amendment rights, which is also a load of horse, you know what, as we have already learned from prior briefing and motions in front of other courts, that therefore he couldn't be tried until after he was through with another term of the presidency. So in essence, what his lawyers have asked for is a 2029 trial date in Fulton County, which caused myself and quite a number of other legal commentators to just laugh in horror at the prospect that that could even be a possibility that anyone would legitimately ask for in a court of law. The idea that we would have to wait 5 years for a trial of, someone who potentially is trying to overthrow democracy is shocking. It was not something that was well received by Judge McAfee, thankfully, but the judge has not ruled yet on when a trial date is going to be. I will say that I think that based on his initial reaction to that, which was sort of like, okay, I don't think that we're likely to see that take place, but nonetheless, all of this is raising very serious concerns about the scheduling once again. And so I will just tell everyone that my perception at this moment is that we are going to see a trial date set in 2024 for Donald Trump. There was another very significant moment, however, in this hearing on Friday that I think a lot of people blew past because of the shock and horror of what Trump's lawyers were trying to do. And that was that the attorneys on Fani Willis's team were asked by the judge how much time they thought they would need from the moment where the judge set a trial date, how much time in advance they would need of that trial date to get subpoenas out for witnesses. And essentially the answer was 30 days. So that is a signal from Fani Willis's team that they're ready to go at any moment. And even though the request for an August trial date has been made, if the judge says, too bad, we're starting at the end of January, Fani Willis's team is going to be ready to go. So that is a little bit of good news that's coming out of this. But my expectation is that we're going to hear a revisitation of this at the next round of hearings in December. We may hear about it sooner than that. It certainly seems as though the judge is actively considering what the strategy here is going to be from the standpoint of trying everyone together, trying them in chunks, or when. But do I think that there is a likelihood that Trump is not going to be tried in this case until 2029? Absolutely not. I mean, just absolutely not. I think the more likely thing, actually, given where we are, is that there would be a trial date set earlier in 2024 in light of the arguments that were made by Trump's team. And I have to also just add to this, because there's been a lot of questions over on the Patreon feed from our paid subscribers about the issue of cross-trial scheduling, given that Trump is facing down civil and criminal trials in like 6 different arenas at the moment. And one of the things that the judge asked again of Trump's lawyers in the hearing on Friday in Fulton County was, well, is your client planning on being present for every day of the trial? And the answer was no. And so that also opens up some more flexibility for the judge. I mean, there was an indication that he plans to be there for jury selection, which strikes me as, you know, a fairly intimidatory tactic, frankly, to say my client's going to be here for jury selection, but he's not going to be here for the trial itself. That would seem to me to be something that is designed to intimidate a jury pool. Again, we're going to have to see how this plays out. We know that he's, been doing these press conferences in the New York civil trial every single time that he has been walking in and out of that courtroom on random days. So, the good news about this, I suppose, is that if he's not going to be there every day, the judge is allowed to schedule it kind of whenever he wants, and Trump will have to decide what he wants to do. But we're very much in a position where Trump's lawyers are making arguments that would never fly for any other defendant ever. And I don't think the judge is going to have it. I think we're going to see through a lot of nonsense on that. I mean, in essence, I have to remind you all the flip side of this. The really shocking thing behind this is the idea that Trump may never be tried, because that's very clearly what they're after in Fulton County. And they're after it because the Fulton County case at the moment, seems to be strategically the most advanced. And, that doesn't mean that what's happening in front of Judge Chutkan's courtroom is not as significant. I mean, we have a set trial date there to begin the day before Super Tuesday, and that date is not going to move. Chutkan's really not having any of Trump's nonsense at this point. So I want everybody to be very mindful that, Trump's very afraid of what's happening in Fulton County. That's very, very clear. He's also very worried about what's happening in DC, but I think he's actually more worried about what's happening in Fulton County, because we have confirmed flipped witnesses who were like in the room where it happened. And so I am hopeful that what we're going to see out of Judge McAfee is a trial date no later than August, and possibly quite earlier than that. All right, so that's the immediate news out of Fulton County. Now, we had some other things happening on Friday that were very significant. We had the gag order against Trump reinstated. Again, we talked about this a little bit over the weekend, but I want to make something very clear here. The New York Appellate Division, which is the second. Okay, so in New York, I have to remind everybody, the New York Supreme Court is actually the trial court. Then there's the New York Supreme Court Appellate Division, which is like the appeals level of the trial court. And then the most senior court in New York State is called the Court of Appeals. That's actually like what would be the Supreme Court in any other state. The misnomers are very hard to keep track of, but we had the gag order reinstated in New York State to protect Judge Engoron and his law clerk. And now, as of this morning, like literally, 15, 20 minutes before we went on the air here, Trump's lawyers appealed on an expedited basis to the New York Court of Appeals. The thing that's really crazy about this is that, in essence, what they're trying to do is fight tooth and nail for Trump to be allowed to attack the law clerk and the judge in the final days of this case. And that in and of itself is really quite crazy. I can't imagine that the New York Court of Appeals is going to take kindly to this. Again, we're in a situation here where 274 single-spaced pages of threats to the clerk and the judge have already been admitted into evidence. And we're not in a situation where there's any doubt that him speaking out against the law clerk and the judge is harmless. So I don't expect that there's going to be much weight to this. Again, I have to remind everybody that there may be some sort of administrative stay, but even that at this point, I think is highly unlikely. I think the Court of Appeals is going to take one look at this and be like, nope. Particularly because we know what the impact has been. So keep an eye on that. That is some breaking news first thing this morning that folks should be aware of. And, I'm not alone already in claiming that this is kind of like bonkers. There's no legitimate basis for him to try to seek to overturn this gag order at this point. All right. So that's that. I want to remind everybody as well that we are less than a month out now from the second E. Jean Carroll trial for defamation. That case is set to start, trial is set to start in that case the first week in January. So we are moving very quickly toward what will be likely another multi-million-dollar judgment against E. Jean Carroll. And I just want to point out one thing. We did talk on Friday about this fraudulent transfer of money in defiance of the New York State Judge Engoron in the New York State civil cases receivership of the Trump organization. We talked about this movement of $40 million. $29 million of it went to pay taxes. But it turns out that $5.6 million of that went to pay E. Jean Carroll because Trump was not in a position to be able to complete an appeal in that case, absent having already paid that judgment. So E. Jean Carroll has gotten her first batch of money right now, or at least it's been conveyed to the court. So that in and of itself is another reason why in terms of where that money went. Now, all that said, the receiver in Judge Engoron's case has notified Judge Engoron that $40 million was moved without her permission. And it's now up to Judge Engoron to decide what's going to happen with that. From the perspective of where that money, how the issue of this transfer without permission is going to be addressed by the court. It is no small thing, right? Apparently the receiver has had conversations with Trump's defense attorneys about the fact that this absolutely cannot happen again. But it is now up to Judge Engoron to determine what may happen next as a result of that direct defiance of the court's order. So that's a very big deal. And, again, that trial is upcoming. I just also have to mention that Trump has within the last week, has again defamed E. Jean Carroll on Truth Social. And we may see a third defamation trial as a result of that. So, again, he's clearly completely incapable of keeping his mouth shut, even when there's enormous amounts of money on the line. And I would hope that, at some point this will all come to an end. All right. We are in the final days, speaking of the New York fraud case, we are in the final days of testimony in the New York fraud case. We know that Eric Trump is returning to the stand on Wednesday of this week, and we are going to see Trump testify again a week from today. He is expected to be the final witness in the Trump organization civil fraud case in New York. So it's going to be a very busy week. I mean, I warned everybody about this last week. We very much got to buckle down because the news is fast and furious right now on every legal level. Now, there is a little bit of news out of the New York fraud case. We had initially anticipated, based on signaling from the court, that the trial was going to be complete by December 15th. And as a result of that, we were expecting that closing arguments were going to take place before Christmas. That is now not the case. There was supposed to be a tentative closing argument date of December 22nd. And that date has now been moved to January. So we will see an overlap here of the final closing arguments in the New York State fraud case with the beginning of the E. Jean Carroll case, which is also pending in the same court. Actually, no, that's not true. It's also pending in the Southern District of New York. But can I just tell you guys, fully square, everything's in the same place. So it's going to be an enormous amount of press coverage and overlap in terms of what we're seeing from one courtroom to the other in New York State in the first week in January. Now, I have to remind everybody that I think the reason why this is taking place, Leslie, is because of the holidays. We have Hanukkah coming up. We have Christmas. There's ordinarily an understanding that, you don't impede on these holidays for court time. So my expectation is that is the reason why. But all that said, I got to remind everybody, this is a bench trial. And one of the things that may mean is that the court may already be ready to rule on some of the evidence that has been admitted here. We already know that he's been found liable for fraud. The outstanding counts are on things like insurance fraud and filing of fraudulent documents. We've had plenty of evidence and really no defense of any significance on those particular claims here. And as well, at this stage of the game, given that what's really been evaluated through all of this is the valuation, because the valuation is what is going to determine the degree of the fine. I would not be surprised if Judge Engoron already has a ballpark going on this, if not a drafted order ready to fly, because we're very much in a position where, given that it's a bench trial, we're not waiting on like jury deliberations or anything like that. And while the judge obviously has to hold out until the end of trial to evaluate all of the evidence that's coming in, that doesn't mean that there might not already be a determination based on what's been presented so far about liability and a ballpark figure that the judge may have in mind. I mean, this is ongoing work that is generally handled by a court throughout a trial when it's a bench trial. I certainly had circumstances where in bench trials that I was involved in, there was one, like the very last case that I tried in the Southern District of New York was a $350 million kind of blended securities and fraud case. And that was tried in front of Judge Preska. And we had an order from that court, no jury. We had an order from that court within 2 weeks of the end of the trial. And that, was because clearly, Judge Preska is known for being an incredibly detailed judge. So in that instance, that was not shocking because she was really on her game as always in that trial. But, there's a very rapid timetable to these things when it's a bench trial. And that's because judges operate with, a much greater depth of knowledge throughout trials than juries generally do, and also tend to move much more quickly, provided that they have control of their docket in ruling on something like this than, we might see otherwise. So I would expect that we're going to have a ruling on this quite quickly. And I am not at this point, concerned about a few weeks delay as a result of the holidays. I want everybody to understand, however, that, as we head into this window of the holidays, there may be, I said this on Friday, I said something like it yesterday on Progressive Coffee Hour for our Patreon subscribers. There may be a little bit of a slowdown here. And gosh, do I have to tell you guys to take it when it comes, because I think that we are, starting in January, like early January, it's going to be like overlapping trials nonstop until November. And so, it's going to be very intense. And that's on top of the presidential election. That's on top of what's happening internationally. It's going to be a really very intense time. And so my hope is that if and when we get a slowdown here, you guys will all take that as a moment to kind of decompress and remove yourself from the news cycle. I know it's very hard, but we're really going to need it. All right. Other breaking news. This Wednesday is the hearing in front of the Colorado Supreme Court, which is the appeal of the ballot case that was just decided a couple of weeks ago concerning whether or not Trump is going to be allowed on the ballot in Colorado for the 2024 election. I have to remind everybody that the Colorado Supreme Court has taken this on an expedited basis because the finalization of the ballots needs to be completed within the next few weeks. Again, reminder, what the trial court determined in that case was that Trump had, in fact, engaged in insurrection, but that the clause in the 14th Amendment concerning officers of the United States did not apply necessarily to the president or the vice president, or at least the court couldn't determine that. So that's really the issue that's in front of the Colorado Supreme Court. The oral argument will be something that everybody's paying very close attention to on Wednesday. And I would expect that we're going to have a ruling on that from the Colorado Supreme Court, like very quickly by next week. So again, I want everybody to remember that, that all of this at this point is sort of a test case, because there have been other efforts to keep him off the ballot in other states. And if Colorado does it, then that is arguably persuasive authority for other states to take it up. So please keep in mind that, all eyes are going to be on Colorado on Wednesday, and that's also coming up. I just have to respond to this question in the comments about whether or not this will arrive at the IRS or with Carol. There are ways to confirm that. So, I want people to understand that when you're in a receivership situation, there's got to be proof of where that money went. It is not just randomly that he gets to transfer $40 million into his own account, or that he can claim that he paid E. Jean Carroll when he didn't. That's something actually that the court can confirm. So people need to be very mindful of the facts and not engaging in conspiracy theories about where all this is going without information. Okay. Other breaking news over the weekend that was very significant that I was actually quite surprised by is the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, which we all know, if you've been watching here for quite some time, that is the most conservative court of appeals in the nation at this point in the federal bench, ruled on Friday that, like late Friday, I think it might have even been over the weekend, that Greg Abbott has to take those barriers out of the Rio Grande. This is something that I did not expect. My expectation was that the Fifth Circuit was going to allow what had happened at the trial level to stay, and that those razor wire buoys in the Rio Grande that had injured, maimed, and killed migrants fleeing for their safety were not going to be removed by the Fifth Circuit. Lo and behold, the opposite happened over the weekend. And so that's very good news, because now the Federal Court of Appeals has said this is a federal waterway. You, Governor Abbott, have exceeded your authority by putting barriers in the Rio Grande, and they must come out. Again, I expect that there's going to be an attempt to appeal this to the Supreme Court. I am not optimistic that the Supreme Court is going to take that up. Particularly, I think there's a real rationale for it not to at this moment in time, but we will see what happens there. For the moment, Greg Abbott is under an order to take those buoys out of the Rio Grande. And again, I have to say I'm quite stunned by that result, notwithstanding the fact that it's like very good. Okay. I also just want to mention, for those who have forgotten about this, that Mark Meadows' case for removal of his claims out of Fulton County to federal court is on appeal. This morning, we learned what the panel is, the judicial panel that is going to hear his appeal in the 11th Circuit. And that appeal is coming up very quickly. I think we're like days away from it now. The panel is, it includes, this is very good news, one of the judges who previously overruled Eileen Cannon when she tried to appoint a special master to interfere in the classified documents case. And it is a very experienced, largely favorable bench. It does include, it's three judges, one of which is an Obama appointee, I believe two of which are Bush appointees, one W and one not. Don't quote me on that. I know one of them is a Bush appointee, but I think the other one is as well. Nonetheless, this is a panel that is looking actually quite favorably to the return of Mark Meadows' case to state court. And so I'm at least at this point fairly optimistic about the judges that have been pulled for this hearing. And again, that's something that we're really going to be keeping an eye on in the coming days and weeks. Okay. I think that's it. That's like enough for today. My goodness, we are like overwhelmed with legal news. All right. I just want to mention one other thing here, because we have had a lot of questions about strategy as we head into 2024. And I do want to mention that we are running this program. We're going to have a more formal announcement about this in the coming weeks, called Mobilize 2024, that's going to start in mid-January. That's really going to be an incredible training program, over, I think it's going to be 8 weeks now, that's going to encourage all of you to learn how to really be leaders and mobilizers and organizers where you live. So stay tuned for that. We did have some questions on the Patreon feed this morning that were like, how do I help to motivate the Gen Z folks in my area? Well, we're going to have like guest interviews with some of the best Gen Z organizers in the country in that program, as well as lots of other like big names. I mean, I'm very excited about this program. Those of you who were on Progressive Coffee Hour yesterday got a little preview of who some of those folks are. So please stay tuned for that, because it's going to be really incredible. We're going to have scholarships. There's going to be payment plans. It is a paid program, but it's going to be something that we are working very hard to make accessible. And I think, our entire audience is going to be invested in this, because the lineup is like extraordinary. Like, I'm not overstating that. Like the guest teachers that we're going to have in this program are like familiar names to all of you, and it's going to be really worth your time and your investment to get involved in it. All that said, I do know there are a lot of questions right now about what is happening in relation to Israel and Gaza, the end of the ceasefire, how this is impacting how Muslim Americans are planning to vote. There have been a lot of questions about this abandon Biden, quote unquote, movement. There was a rally over the weekend concerning this. The Guardian has a piece about it this morning. I just want to say to everyone that I feel as though very clearly this is not an either or situation. Like, I want everybody to understand that we rise or fall together, and that 15,000 Gazans killed by bombing is unacceptable, just in the same way that the murders and rapes of Israeli citizens was unacceptable on October 7th. And we've got to be facing down the way that this is reflected in America with a nuanced understanding of what it will mean to our country in the event that the circumstances surrounding Biden's reelection are adversely impacted by this. I do want to remind everybody, because this is not getting a lot of airplay, and I really wish it would, that Kamala Harris made some very extraordinary and pointed statements about what is happening in Gaza over the weekend at a conference in the Middle East. I don't know why this is not getting a greater degree of airplay, because her comments were very specific. They were about the fact that the U.S. is not going to allow Gaza to be wiped off the face of the earth. They are not going to allow the continued adverse bombing of civilians, that the U.S. is not going to allow Israel to take over Gaza or the West Bank. And so, there are very strong statements coming out of this White House about the position of the Biden administration on what's happening right now. And I do think that a lot of people are not seeing that. They're missing it. And honestly, the statements that Kamala Harris made over the weekend are the strongest statements that I've seen from the administration so far about pushing back against Israel for what's happening as this ceasefire has continued. So it's incredibly critical that we amplify the fact that the Biden administration is doing everything they can right now. And I have to remind everybody as well that Netanyahu wants this war to continue because it's the only thing that's keeping him out of prison. So it's in a very complex situation. But please do not neglect the fact that the White House is out there over the weekend drawing lines fundamentally about what is going to be acceptable behavior from Israel going forward. And they are not minor, the lines that are being drawn at this moment. So it's very critical that that we continue to recognize that and amplify it and all the rest. And we'll be talking, I'm sure, quite a bit more about the makeup of various elements of the electorate as we head into 2024 here. But I do want everyone to be very clear on the fact that this is an incredibly complex situation. I think the messaging is incredibly difficult. And at the same time, I see movement from the Biden administration on this that is not getting a lot of major media airplay for God knows what reason, in the direction of what I had hoped would be a much stronger pushback against the ongoing bombing of civilians in Gaza, 15,000 Gazans dead, most of whom are children. Again, I think we're seeing movement on this, and it's very significant from the administration itself, while simultaneously making very strong statements against anti-Semitism. So, I have to encourage people to remember that one of the things that's happening on social media right now is that bubbles are being created by algorithms. And I have concern when I see things on the question feed, for instance, on Patreon, that are like, I don't see anybody pushing back on this from whatever perspective. My view at this point is that I'm a single issue voter on this. And if I don't get what I want, I'm only going to vote one way. Well, I have to point something out. If you are actually paying attention to the larger scope of things, if you are seeking out information about the positions that are being advocated for, and you step outside your own social media bubble because that algorithm is feeding you more of what you have responded to, you might actually see that the complexity of the situation and the way in which the Biden administration is handling it is much more nuanced than what you might be getting in that little window. All right. So please pay attention. I think that's really the most critical part. And I think that, I am seeing both an enormous amount of pushback right now against Islamophobia and an enormous amount of pushback against anti-Semitism wherever it lives, not just from the administration, but from average everyday Americans on every side, meaning far left, centrist left, straight Democrats. I'm seeing everybody pushing back on both issues at the same time. And so I really do have to wonder how much of this perspective of nobody's paying attention to my intergenerational trauma and the harm that was caused because of X, whatever it may be, is not because folks are not questioning the role of social media algorithms in feeding them more of what they've seen and reacted to. Okay. So if your intergenerational trauma is being triggered by what you've seen on social media and you post on somebody's comment, anybody's comment, that's horrible. I can't believe it. It's disgusting. I can't believe that this is happening to my community. The algorithm is going to feed you more of that horror. and more of those posts that say, nobody's responding to this. Why is nobody responding to this? When in fact, you know, if you're me and you've taken the big picture on this and you've got like this really diverse and nuanced bubble of information that's coming to you, like if you have consciously crafted what you're following and you are intentionally seeking out broad perspectives, what you will find is in fact that there's people expressing horror on every side. There's people saying this is unacceptable on every side. And there are also people who are pushing the administration to do even more from both sides. So it's really critical that, you know, if you are having a moment of being like, nobody's paying attention to how my community has been harmed, that you question whether or not that perspective is being adversely impacted, amplified, your confirmation bias is being triggered by the algorithms on social media, because I can virtually guarantee you that that's the case. All right. So please be mindful of that. You know, I just have to say from my perspective, which again, you guys have no idea how much effort goes into how I curate what I see on social media, how cautious I am about who I follow, how much I seek out alternative information to make sure that I stay informed and balanced in what I'm viewing. It's really hard to do that. And I know that for the average everyday citizen, it's really tough. But I have seen plenty of evidence on Threads alone that people are in a bubble where all they're getting from the algorithm is no one's paying attention, no one's responding, nobody's standing up for my community, nobody. And then the next post down for me is like 6 separate Congress people saying the way that this community is being treated in this conflict is unacceptable. So again, like very important to understand that social media functions on clicks and outrage, okay? And if your experience there is a perception that nobody cares, you're really missing half the story. Like I can guarantee it. All right. Okay. That's it for today. I am going to be back here every day this week. I do need to mention something with regard to the broadcast a week from today. There is a possibility next week, because of something going on with my kids on Monday, December 11th, that the broadcast may be later than usual. So stay tuned for an update on that later on in the week. I'm waiting to see whether or not something changes in the current schedule of that. But there may be a possibility that the broadcast on Monday, December 11th will be later in the day. All right. So for everybody who's here, please, stay tuned on that. And I will also just mention that for the holiday schedule, we will be talking about that a little bit more in the coming days. But obviously, there will be no broadcast on Monday, December 25th, or on Monday, December 31st, because those are like, I guess it's Monday the 1st. I can't even remember at this point. There's not going to be a broadcast for 2 Mondays at the end of December. That's all you need to know about that. And if there's a little bit more on that, I will be sure to tell you guys. But at this point, we are not traveling for this holiday season. We have family coming to see us in early January instead. And so that is the current plan. All right. And I will just also let you guys know that there may be a day in early January where I am not available because I'm going to have family here. All right. If you have not thumbs up this broadcast, if you have not liked this broadcast, if you have not subscribed yet to this channel, or you are not yet a paid subscriber over on patreon.com, we would greatly appreciate your support in any or all of those fashions. You can become a paid subscriber at patreon.com/resistance live. All right. Thanks, everybody. I will catch you all here tomorrow at regular time. All right. Bye.